I'm going to show you how I do a core cavity mold design in Fusion 360. First I create a sketch. I lay down a square that's the size of my mold blank, which is 4 inches by 4 inches. Okay, we'll finish up that sketch. Now we're going to insert the part that we want to mold, and so this is a little part that I use for a product I sell on Amazon. We're going to try to do this like you were squishing this into a pile of Play-Doh or putty or something like that and pull it back out, and then that would kind of be what you would think of as your mold. So we're going to flip this over, go ahead and extrude to mold blank to 0.75 inches, which is the size of my stock. Now you see the bottom of that part kind of showing at the main level. Next thing we want to do is to actually use the combine feature to pull that part out of the mold so that what is left is the negative. So we're going to use combine and then cut feature. Now I'm going to turn off the component so we can see what the negative looks like. This is what the core cavity mold would have in it if it had an infinitesimally small lid on it. So everything that you see there, with the exception of the sides, is what you would call the core side of the mold. So what we want to do next is to extrude that down and expose the core, taking away the sides. Now what we have is the true core of the mold. Let's start working on the cavity now. We'll go ahead and name this body the core so we can get back to it and know what it is easily. Now we're going to create a sketch on the top plane of the core side of the mold, and this is where the cavity start will happen. So we're going to create another side here that's also 4x4 in a sketch. Now we're going to extrude this cavity, and what we're going to want to do is to have a cavity without the part inside of it. So if we went ahead and extruded it, you would see it would take on that part. We're going to go ahead and shut off the core side of the mold, so all we see is the outline of the mold top, and so we'll select both those areas and then we'll extrude that to 0.75 as well, because that's the size of the mold on the top side. Now we want to flip this around, and we turned on the component again so you can kind of see the top side of the component just right at the top level. What we want to do is to figure out how to get the cavity side of this, where it's just the outline, into the mold. So we're going to use the project feature of Fusion 360 in the sketch, and we're going to just select the line segments around the perimeter, and then that will transfer the shape of the perimeter onto the sketch. At this point I have the shape of the outline of the cavity, which is great, but given that plastic will shrink, what I want to do is make this cavity slightly larger than it would normally be for the exact size of the part. So we're going to add another few thousandths of an inch on there, and if you zoom in real close, you should be able to see a little bit of an extra outline that we're going to pick, and that'll make the cavity just ever so slightly larger. So we've got that offset now, and then we're going to select the offset plus the interior space, and we're going to extrude that down, and we know from the part dimensions that that height of that part is 0.26 inches. Now we are going to go ahead and turn on the core side of this mold to kind of put it together. You can see now what I'm showing is that kind of shorter side is the core side, and the taller side is the cavity side. And now we want to kind of take a look inside of it and just see if it looks like we think it should. So we've renamed the body to the cavity so we can come back and take a look at it. Now we'll use the section tool to have a look inside. So let's use the section analysis tool to see what we have in here. So I pick that out of the measurement, and then we can just run the section back, and this gives us a good idea of, to make sure that the bottom of the core is touching the top of the cavity and that sort of thing. So it looks okay to me. Okay, let's jump back to the core side of the mold and start adding some features that help make this a usable mold. We're going to put in some guide pins now, and we'll do that on the top side of the base of the core side here. I found that 5/16 of an inch is a pretty good size for guide pins, whether you're milling them in or using them as steel pins. If I can mill the guide pin in, that's typically what I'll do. It turns out to be faster and more straightforward, and then you don't end up using any steel pins at the same time. And usually I'm not doing so many turns that those ever wear out or anything like that. So we'll go ahead and mill them in. This is going to be an aluminum mold, and put them 0.4 inches from the corners. Then I'll go ahead and put in a construction line, go in both directions, and so we can start to do some mirroring here. That ensures that things get in the right place, and we'll have 4 pins here in a second. So I'll bring up the mirror functionality. I'm going to select the circle for the guide pin that we just created in the sketch, and that'll be the object, and then we need to click on that center line, which is the mirror line. Click OK, and then you'll see the one over in the lower right corner show up. Now we're going to do another mirror line horizontally through the piece, and we'll turn that into a construction line. And now we'll go ahead and select mirror again, and we'll pick the bottom 2 circles and mirror those across the horizontal line, and that'll give us 2 guide pins in the upper section of the mold. Okay, now we want to raise the guide pins out of the mold. So we'll make sure that sketch is turned on, and then we'll select the extrude functionality and pick all of the circles for the guide pins. Then we're going to raise those about 0.25. That feature in the middle is 0.26 at its most highest, and we definitely do not want the pins to go beyond that. So we'll make them just a little bit shorter, and they'll still work fine as a guide. Now we'll do the same for the cavity side, and since that sketch I did for the guide pins is right at the boundary, we can use the same sketch to extrude into and cut out the guide pin holes in the cavity section. Now these are going to be exactly the same size holes as the guide pins are, and so in the real world those would probably not slide together. What I usually do is I'll go ahead and make them the same size, and then use the milling operations to take a little bit more of the lateral stock until we get that fit.